Camp counselors of Reddit, what is the most NSFW thing you've seen happen at camp? Finally a chance to post this. One year I was working a regular camp and had a lead counselor run over to another counselor and I to say look in the first stall of the boys' bathroom. We left our kids with our age group's female counselors and ran. By the time we made it, a crowd of counselors had formed around the toilet. Contained inside was by far the mightiest, largest turd I have ever seen in my life. Easily a diameter of 3 inches and long enough to be far down into the toilet while also freewheeling out of the surface of the water. No campers were told about this. A few days later a camper asked me if we were running to the bathroom the other day because of a giant piece of poop and claimed to be the conjurer of it. I was mortified. My favorite was a 13-year-old boy at camp out. Both his hands were in his sleeping bag and he was clearly masturbating. His counselor called a hand check where you have to display both hands in the air. He only raised one hand. The counselor asked for both hands and he replied, "Give me 4 minutes." I was working at a young life camp in Colorado probably 12 years ago. I think it was the first day right around dinner time and a girl just up and died. Her heart just stopped. She was sitting talking with her friends and fell over. It was incredibly intense and very sad for a lot of people and tons of people were there to witness it. It's not the most scandalous of camp stories, but it was certainly pretty ducked up and put a weird vibe on the rest of the week. Saw a girl give a guy a hand job under a towel. On the bus. On the bus filled with children. On the bus filled with children going to a Christian camp. Counselors having a threesome in an empty cabin next to the bathrooms. I was a camp counselor a few years ago at a camp for foster kids. One week a counselor caught a camper, M15, in bed with another camper, F14. The room they were in was tiny, and the 4 other girls in the bunks were awake and cheering them on. They were loud enough to wake the counselor, who pulled the male camper out of bed. The guy had a Ziploc bag around his D, held in place by a rubber band. I was both impressed at their dedication to trying to have sappho sex, and appalled at how terribly they went about it. This actually happened earlier today. I work at a summer day camp at a local park with kids in kindergarten age group. Interesting gross things happen almost every day with kids at that age, but today's event took the cake. Basically the 6-year-old boy found a dead bird in the grass and decided it would be fun to pick it up and smear the blood and guts all over his hands and arms. After doing that, he started chasing around other campers to try to share his bird entrails on them. I had the pleasure of catching the gore-covered kid, ripping the bird's ravaged carcass out of his hands, and spending half an hour in the bathroom getting him and myself cleaned up. When I asked him why the heck he picked up a dead animal, he said that he thought it was something awesome to do. Edit. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Just goes to show that comments about 6-year-olds savaging animals are totally the way to go. Had 6-year-old campers at a day camp. After swimming, found 2 of them facing each other naked in the locker room. They were standing there, hitting each other's erect D's and making the boing boing sounds. I had 2 twin brothers that were very handsy with each other. One day one of them came to me crying because his brother had bit his tongue after he tried kissing him. I was a counselor at a day camp. We took kids to the zoo. A kid shoved his thumb fully inside a petting zoo goat's butt. I asked him why and he just shrugged, looking at me like I'm the idiot. I felt bad for the goat, but it was still standing next to him, so maybe it was into it. There were these 2 kids, which we nicknamed Poo Poo Picasso and Gandhi. Both were in my friend's cabin, which was year 2 campers. So the kids were just out of 3rd grade. So I guess they were around 8 or 9 years old. Anyway, Poo Poo Picasso would smear his it. He'd defecate inside of his trunk and left it there for a day before my friend noticed the smell. He wrote on the walls of the bathrooms with his own feces. It was disgusting. Now Gandhi didn't want to be at summer camp, despite it being a total blast. He would itch and complain and ask to call home, which he wasn't allowed to do unless it was a rather serious situation. Fine, we deal with this sometimes. But what we weren't expecting was for him to go on a hunger strike. That's right, a hunger strike. He just would refuse to eat for several meals. He would break and eat a ton of snacks during our afternoon refreshment period when he thought we wouldn't notice. What made Gandhi really special is that he learned how to vomit on command. To do so he would drink insane amounts of water. Then when we would ask him to do something he didn't want to do, he would just vomit everywhere. It was nasty, but at the same time typing this out is making me giggle. Eventually the two kids got over it, I think. After reading about all the camp counselors having sex with each other, I've decided I'm gonna be a camp counselor. I was a day camp counselor during the summers in high school. I watched another counselor eat herself out after smoking by the gully. My 16-year-old self couldn't look away. Also, generally, the counselors are ducking like rabbits. There was this Asian kid named Kevin who went to the bathroom to take her it, but there was pee on the toilet seat, so he started to cry and then took her it on the floor because he really had to go. I was a camp counselor years ago, and while I don't recall really seeing anything NSFW with the kids, I can tell you almost everything I saw with the counselors was NSFW. I couldn't walk into a room without seeing people ducking in tents, on top of the staff washing machines, in the general store. Parents, if you send your kids to camp, just remember, literally the only thing those counselors are thinking about is ducking each other. I saw one of the campers using hedge trimmers without the proper gloves. I gave him the gloves, and then his gardening service activity became SFW. I work in a building that hosts a camp for people with autism and other mental handicaps. A guy with something was really attached to his counselor, a girl. He really liked her and asked her out almost every hour of the week. She finally said no, I have a boyfriend or something along those lines. He got really mad and stripped down and freaked out. He peed and pooped all over the floor. When other counselors were trying to calm him down, he ran over to a fire extinguisher box and smashed his head into the glass. He had big chunks of glass in his face and forehead, bleeding everywhere. We were told as building managers to stay clear of the floor he was on. They would clean it all up. It was odd. Another story, when he left the building we also found a sort of poop shrine. He would poop in the closet and then mold underwear to it. He must have used a whole can of Febreze on the thing a day because we never knew about it. Couldn't smell anything. In high school I was a counselor at a community outdoor camp where a lot of the kids who attended were there just because their parents needed to put them somewhere. These kids were typically 8-12 years old. We would have to take the kids on hikes around the property where we'd see a bunch of uninteresting animals, hang out by a pond or creek, then head back to the main center where some animal expert would bring in a snake or owl to give the children some excitement each day. One week we got these two little dudes who hated everything about the camp from the start, but they hated each other more than Samuel Jackson hates snakes on a plane. They were constantly finding creative ways to piss each other off throughout the week. On the last day of camp we had just finished a hike and stopped by a creek where everyone could rest and look for frogs or throw mud into the woods. Behind me I hear one of the two call the other a itch, after which I slowly turned around to see what the other one would do. The accused itch had picked up a half cinder block size rock and was bringing over his head so he could smash the back of the accuser's head in with it. Fortunately I was close enough to where I could grab the rock before it came down on the other kid's unsuspecting head. TLDR. Stopped a 12-year-old from smashing another 12-year-old's head in with a rock the size of a 12-year-old's head. I worked at a sleepaway Girl Scout camp with all female counselors and staff where a solid 60% were lesbian. There was a strictly enforced no more ducking in the bushes rule, because so many counselors would go at it anywhere they could find. Andre is not a happy camper. Camper who spoke no English got a nasty head wound from a nail on the cabin rafters that he died into. Also so much counselor 6. I have been waiting my whole life for this post. So at the beginning of summer camp, many children are shy, anxious, nervous etc. Other just flat out don't want to be there. One of those people happens to be the phantometer. So first week of camp, one of the counselors that I work with was doing a bathroom check, just for overall cleanliness of the site. They found that someone was poop painting on the bathroom stalls. Disgusting but not unheard of. Later that week, it happens again. Only this time there is a clear message, painted and bolded on the bathroom wall was I want freedom. The phantometer doesn't know how to spell, but you get the idea. The situation develops further the following week. Field trip. Rather large playground that has a tall slide structure. When I say tall, this thing is bigger than a house. At the top of it there is an area where people wait in line to go on these giant slides. As one counselor goes up to watch his children go down said slides, he finds a glorious turd at the top of the slide. Now the phantom eater would not have gotten away with taking it at the top of the slide. Way too much traffic up there. My theory, they took the id elsewhere in the park and then walked there it up to the top to be found. Since then there has been more cave paintings on the bathroom walls but no further turds. We'll post updates if anyone gives a duck. This story needs to be heard. I don't care how buried it gets. Ex-counselor here. Our camp has a thing where one night all the people who had been there for 3 years go out and do crazy it in the fields by the camp. Needless to say I saw a lot of breasts. But other than that and smoking weed nothing really big happened. Apparently in years before some of the abandoned cabins were used during that night for out-of-six parties with lots of alcohol involved. This was back in like the 1990s where I guess the upper staff were a lot more lenient. I worked at the camp in 2010 so I guess I missed the really interesting stuff. It was interesting to bring up the topic to my boss who worked at the camp as a counselor at that time and see him get all red-faced and not know what I was talking about. TLDR. A wild night once a year used to a Krasisix party but not we just flash each other and smoke. Day 1 at camp. We jumped out of the bus and ran around because we were so excited. My friend ran behind the bus and the bus ran him over. He was rushed off by ambulance. Didn't see him for another 3 months. Edit spelling. I sound like a 12-year in those few sentences. I'm 42. Never sending my kids to camp. And I should have been a camp counselor when I was in high school. I worked as a counselor at a camp for adults with disabilities. All my campers were in their 20s, late 30s. One night one of my campers was masturbating loudly and furiously because we all slept in one giant room. Her noises were waking everyone up. It was so distracting that I had to give her the masturbation chat the next day and also explain it to all my campers privately. Boy, what a fun day that was. I'm late to this so this probably won't be seen. Camper, 13. Carves giant D out of wood. Camper proceeds to run around laughing holding it on his crotch and such. Counselor laying on a bunk asks to see it. Still lying down. Counselor holds wooden D vertical on crotch. Envy detected. Camper runs up and sits on the wooden D while it's being held by the counselor. I put it in the incinerator. I worked at an 8-week sleepaway camp in the northeast and was working in a bunk of 7 and 8 year olds. As the summer went along we lost a few counselors due to the fact our campers were the devil's spawn and only 6 or 7 years old. So us remaining counselors were spread thin. And one day in the span of 10 minutes when we didn't have a counselor in the bunk, I'm walking back and all the kids are running out of the bunk screaming about how one of the campers, M6, put his D in another kid's mouth. M7. This is an all boys camp too. And when the camper was later asked why he let the other kid put his D in his mouth, the kid's response was because they dared me to after long lashings from the director and owners and what I assume was some long talks with the kid's parents. It was all swept under the rug and forgotten. TLDR. A camper put his D in another male camper's mouth. NSFW in that I should have never been told at work. I'm a camp director and we had a kiddo who was at camp for the first time. Roughly 10 years old. Mum gave us a heads up that dad's health was failing and she wanted her son to have a break and recoup. But we also might have some behavioral issues. Great. No problem. We'll take great care of him. She calls Wednesday to tell me dad died the night before. I extend my condolences and state that I'll quietly get her son packed, but not say anything to him. She says, no, I'm going to leave him there for now. I want him to have 2 more days of joy before I break his little heart. It was the longest 2 days of my life. Knowing this kid's world was going to shatter Friday afternoon, I had to tell a few other staff so that we could be absolutely sure he had the best 2 days. It just sucked so bad for the adults, obviously sucked worse for the child. But you know what I mean. Walking in on 2 15-year-old girls having the worst smelling lesbiansix. It stunk up the whole dorm all night. We had to open all the windows. Everyone knew. Finally something I can actually weigh in on. I work at a day camp for kids ages 4-13. I was with a group of about 10 kids, all 8 or 9 years old. One day before pool time one kid walked into the bathroom. got buck-ass naked, then started crying because he had lost his bathing suit. I went in trying to defuse the situation and he bolted. He ran around at top speed screaming and crying, flailing his arms all over the place. Do you know how illegal it looks for a 16-year-old boy to chase a nude 8-year-old? Well, I eventually caught the kid and brought him back to the bathroom. When I asked him what his bathing suit looked like, he pulled a bathing suit out and said it looks like this. OHHH. Methodika had his bathing suit 6 feet from him the entire time. I used to work at a Cub Scout summer camp and one summer we had a staff member named Mark. Mark was your general super douche boy scout, not saying all scouts are douches but there are certainly some gigantic ones, and completely overconfident in himself. So one day Mark was telling all of us, the staff, about how his D is 10 inches soft and not even jokingly he was being very serious. So clearly we all knew he was bulleting, so that night a few of the other staff spray painted a giant D on the side of his tent along with the quote 10 inches soft. The best part was the paint didn't show up unless it was dark and then it glowed. So whenever you walked up to the tent site at night you could see a giant glowing D with 10 inches soft quoted underneath. The best part was none of the management knew until the next summer when we were setting up tents for the summer. And when the ranger saw it he got so angry and offended and started talking about how all kids nowadays are Satan. Myself and the other counselors in training stayed over in the food meeting hall place one night with one of the counselors. Truth or dare started happening. Someone truthed this French exchange student chick, "What's the farthest you've ever gone with someone?" in broken English. She said something along the lines of, "One time my cousin and I were together and he put his balls on me," motion to her crotch, "and we went like this humping motion." Silence. Lots of worried looks exchanged. Next person's turn. Was checking rooms after everyone was supposed to have moved out. Found a 12-year-old ducking another 12-year-old male and coming just as I opened the door. They didn't hear me, so I waited a few minutes, then knocked on the door and opened it to find 2 innocent kids packing their bags. They apologized for being slow to get out of their room. We heard rumors about the cabin next to us one week at camp. It was a game called Monkey and it involved one of the kids getting naked and putting a sock over his D. He'd then swing around the room using the bed frames and whatnot, making monkey noises. To this day I'm not sure what the game was. I'm guessing you won if you didn't get raped. First year working camp around 2004. Had a junior leader making his D into a helicopter around the youngest campers outside of the showers yelling, "Shake, shake, shake, shake your D." 2 years later I was co-lead of the leaders in training. We had some new counselors bunking in the same building. Found one winner watching porn. He later admitted it was child porn on his Zoom. Had around 10 counselors bring alcohol on campgrounds while kids were sleeping. One ended up puking all night in a bucket in the middle of his cabin. Others were laid out all over camp. Almost forgot this one. 17-year-old girl in the junior leaders program stuck a fork into a socket to show others that it was safe. She was wrong. There were plenty of NSFW camp moments all around, but figured I'd share some of the top moments. Really sad I'm late to this, but I was actually at work as a camp counselor, so I hope this doesn't get buried. It was my senior year of high school and a group of upperclassmen always go with the 5th graders to 5th grade camp. Most kids' first nights away from home. I was part of this group and it was my second year doing this. On the bus ride to the camp, I noticed one of the kids was sitting by himself and wasn't talking to anyone. He was a student who had recently moved to the States from China and wasn't very good at speaking English yet, so I assumed he was just being shy because of that and sitting alone. I started to talk with him as best I could and asked if he was excited for camp. Blah blah blah. Eventually he started getting red in the face and wrapped his arm around his stomach. I assumed he was getting car sick from the bus, so I grabbed the trash bucket by the bus driver and the kid started screaming, "Bucket, bucket." So I quickly handed him the bucket. He proceeded to take the bucket and put it on the seat next to him, which I assume he's planning to throw up into. He then stands up onto the seat and before I even comprehend what was happening he pulls down his pants, mooning the entire bus of 5th grade boys and girls as well as other counselors, and proceeded to sit on the bucket and eat in it. Right there on the bus with everyone watching. As the only teacher on the bus and I screamed his name. He stopped mid-it and put his pants on. He finished pooping in his pants and then we had to stop the bus at a McDonald's so that we could throw away his underwear and he could wipe and clean himself up. It was disgusting. TL. DR 5th grader it in a bucket on the bus ride to camp. I was a sit at a Boy Scout camp and one day another guy and I go look in the staff showers and see someone has taken a mighty it. It must have been at least 3-4 because this pile is massive. About a foot in diameter. And while we were showering nearby, we kept hearing other counselors come by, look at the it and start screaming. I was 18 and training to be a camp counselor. I would do day-to-day work around the camp to help everyone out and one day I went to the laundry room to drop off a load of dirty sleeping bags where there were 3 girls from my group, around 14 years old, going to town on each other. Full on lesbian 3-way. Nope, the duck out of the laundry room. I was a counselor for a teen group. 13-16-year-old boys and girls. We took the group of about 25 on a camping trip to Oklahoma. Since most of the kids came from pretty well-to-do families and the IMCA where we worked had plenty of money, we were staying in pretty swanky cabins. 1 large living room downstairs and 2 large, loft-style rooms upstairs. Of course we separated the girls on one side, boys to the other and counselors in between. One of the female counselors noticed some dust on the floor of the shower one night and looked up to see a hole in the ceiling. The boys had taken the coat hooks out of the wall and used that to drill holes down into the shower so they could watch the girls. They had even gone so far as to work out shifts and an elaborate signal system when counselors were nearby. They were able to keep it up for 2 nights before anyone noticed. We had to notify all of the parents. Very awkward conversations. Hey Sulu, about 20 teenage boys may have seen your daughter naked. I was a counselor at a boys camp. One day, a counselor walked into his cabin to see most of the campers, all about 13 years old, jacking it with lacrosse gloves and cuming on other campers' pillows. Yep. This story takes place at an academic camp help on university grounds and has 2 parts. Part 1 was fairly mundane. As NSFW camp stories go, there we were, walking by the dorms after lights out to make sure no one was trying to sneak out, when we spy a flashing light in the window of the attic of boys' dorm. We found our way up there and discovered that one of the campers had both A. brought a portable strobe light with him to camp and B. felt it was a good idea to deploy said strobe while getting it on with a fellow camper. It was really jarring. We separated them and made plans to call their parents in the morning. The second part of the story is more unique, I hope. The guy with the strobe immediately told his various dorm mates why he had been busted. And by dawn everyone in both dorms had heard of his sexual exploits. This upset his young paramour. Apparently, she broke into a storage room looking for a weapon and found a large fork used for turning sausages on the barbecue, which he took along with a pair of oven mitts. Giant pointy tines was apparently not good enough for her, so she borrowed all of the other girls' curling irons, clipped them to the fork, heated it up, and stabbed him in the stomach with it. One day on the bus back to town with a kid Sarah from Ville, one 15-year-old girl decided it would be a grand old time to help a male counselor grease his gherkin. Needless to say, he was asked to not return the following summer. He on the other hand was hired as a JC the next summer, so all of the senior counselors referred to her in private as Blowjob Bonnie. Read a bunch. Still miss camp. Not NSFW but definitely awesome. I was on another counselor's porch that was filled with 2nd graders who wouldn't shut up after lights out. The counselor ran in and told the 2nd graders a hairy clitoris monster was living in the woods and would eat them if they didn't shut up. They started crying lol. Worked at a Cub Scout camp. Hooked up with another staff member and dated for a few weeks until the girl left me for another female staff member. That went on for the rest of camp. They broke up afterwards. And now that 2nd girl, the one I didn't date at camp, is my wife. In the camp I used to work at, we'd always used to get a couple of troubled kids. It was an overnight camp, so the female campers had cabins designated rooms on the 1st floor, and the male campers on the 2nd floor. One night, I went to check on my campers before their set bedtime to make sure everything was alright. I heard yelling from the room above us. Although I couldn't quite fathom what was happening, I had just assumed that it was just another typical camper counselor argument because a camper refuses to go to sleep. Yeah. Turns out one of the campers had turned one of those wire hangers into some sort of brass knuckles rings and started threatening his counselors with it because he was lectured for being disruptive. Just today some girl scratched her butt, smelled the finger, made her friend next to her smell it, then proceed to pick her nose with the same finger. I was an overseas counsellor, England, working at a Jewish camp up in the hills outside Montreal. One day, after the campers' shower time, they returned to the bunk to dry off. Always a time in which I and the other staff would avoid purely due to the weirdness that would ensue. It was usually chaos. I'm talking underpant head wrestling coupled with naked 5 frog splashes. Anyway, one day during the final session of a 3-month summer, the post-shower bunk seemed a bit quiet. I walk in to see all but 3 of the 12 campers stood in a line behind 2 other campers. Not too unusual, they always played dumb games. This one was perhaps a little different, though. They were effectively playing, and they're often known by the staff as the deep throat game. Each kid would take a turn deep throating one older child. Duck knows what the winner got. I dread to think. Needless to say, head staff were told, and parents informed. TLDR, kids suck at getting changed after showers. Camp counselor for a bunch of 12-year-olds a couple years back, and Tyson, the horny little duck, jerked off every night. We all stayed in big teepees and I'd always hear that kid wank away every night. Just the subtle sound of movement and then it would gradually die after a few minutes. I don't know if he brought a roll of toilet paper for his frequent fat tickets, if he used his sleeping bag as little Tyson cemetery, or if Tyson was shooting blanks, but I could not sleep to the sound of that kid beating away every night. The legend of Ripsack finally has a proper place to be told. USA Northwest. We had this beautiful elevated wooden walkway that ran through the whole camp. These boards get slippery when wet and being the Northwest it's wet pretty frequently. The kids, 14-16, are told not to run on the walkway but kids never listen. So there's one of the younger kids running along and his left leg slides off the walkway. His crotch is pretty much at a 90-degree angle, and he sees blood running down his leg. He screamed the whole way while crawling to the nurse's office. I didn't witness the actual event but any member with any medical training way called in so I saw the aftermath. Mr. Ripsack is going to have a fun scar to explain to future partners. The most humiliating part for him other than having his ballsack ripped open was having squat over a bucket filled with disinfectant to clean the wound. Poor Ripsack. I guess this could literally be not safe for work. We had a scare one night while all the counselors were in the basement of the dorm the kids slept in, having a meeting. I was in the hallway patrolling for kids who were staying up past lights out homesick. One kid comes running out of the bathroom yelling for me to come quick. I go with him into the bathroom, and he points out the window into the parking lot. We are on the 2nd story. Standing in the parking lot under a spotlight was a dude in a Guy Fawkes mask, holding a machete. He was motioning it across his throat and pointing up at us. Then he was gone. I ran into the basement to interrupt the meeting, and you should have seen the faces on these counselors. They were grabbing bats, rackets, clubs, anything they could use to go Casey Jones on whoever this punk was outside. Unfortunately, the guy never showed up again or was caught. The cops took statements from the 2 kids who saw him and then the counselors patrolled the dorm until finally giving up and going to sleep. One of the funniest parts was that we could see the girl counselors in the dorm across the street anxiously searching, with bats raised, for a potential killer in their dorm. Ah, good times. We had a camp store. At the beginning of the session your parents would put in like $40 so you could buy little things or ice cream if you wanted. However, everyone always ran out. Girls started prostituting themselves for store goods. A nipple peek for an ice cream. A butt grab for 2 king-size candy bars. A kiss for sodas. It escalated. It was awesome. I've been a camp counselor for about 4 years for a Girl Scout camp. And let's underline that. A Girl Scout camp. So I think this was 2 years ago or so. Our camp runs overnight for girls that are like 4th through 7th graders or so. For one night, this 4th grader, or so, she looked really young and did not understand what she was doing and stuff, brought a 6 toy she found in her parents' dresser. She had no clue what it was. We didn't know she brought it till campfire. where she would rub this glass dildo, I didn't get a good look at, it might have been glass, not sure, all over her face, sometimes putting it in her mouth. The Girl Scout camp directors were not pleased. They called her mother at about 10 or 11 PM and told her what her daughter had brought with her up to the overnight. The mother was super embarrassed after getting that call.